Thank you for joining the Woman Meets Weights interview series. I'm your host, David Shawn. We're going to talk with top experts from around the world and from all walks of life who are going to show you how the most fit women today use strength training for fat loss and why strong is the new sexy. Today's guest is Dr. Tyna Moore. Dr. Moore specializes in the application of natural pain solutions and regenerative injection therapies to treat all varieties of musculoskeletal conditions. As both a board-certified naturopathic and chiropractic physician, she brings a unique perspective and expertise to the diagnosis and treatment of orthopedic conditions. Dr. Tyna, thank you so much for joining the Woman Meets Weights interview series. Very happy to have you.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, really excited about this one. I hope that all the listeners will take some notes on this interview. Got a feeling it's going to be a good one. How's your day going?
Good. How's yours?
It's going really good. So should we kind of warn the listeners that there's dogs that might bark? Let's just get that out there.
Yes, I'm sorry. My pack.
No, that's all right. For the people that have listened through this whole interview series, there's been several interviews with dogs barking. So if they stuck with it through this point, they know that it might happen. So anyway, can you start by telling us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I am a chiropractor and a naturopathic physician, and I currently have a private practice in Portland, Oregon. My practice is predominantly focused on naturopathic orthopedics, and what I mean by that is I do mostly regenerative injection therapies at this point. I used to have a big practice in bioidentical hormone replacement, autoimmune disease, general naturopathy, but I focused that down just on sports-specific and orthopedic-specific injection therapies. So I do prolotherapy, platelet-rich plasma, stem cell injections, and with a big focus on rehabilitation, much of that being strength training based. So that's about where I'm at right now. And personally, I am an avid weightlifter and a Pilates instructor, and I think I've discovered in my elder age that I have ADD. I must, because I love to move, and if I'm not moving, I don't feel well. So I'm a big proponent of everything I'm going to talk to you about today. I live it.
Very cool. Yeah, movement is so important. It seems like we're almost getting programmed with society to just decide that we're supposed to be okay with not moving. Like what other time period in history have kids had to sit in a classroom, and if they have too much energy and they move 8 hours straight, then they actually get in trouble? It just doesn't make sense. Doesn't make sense to me.
It breaks my heart. It breaks my heart because I think that we know that movement makes your brain work better. So asking society, and I think that people start to get stagnant. The more they sit, the more stagnant they become, and the more defeated and deflated they feel. And so, it's a vicious cycle that people get into. And then they start to hurt. The less they move, the more they hurt. The more they hurt, the less they want to move. And so that's predominantly my patient base. I mean, I have a very healthy, I'm pretty lucky. I have a fairly fit, healthy patient base. I think I attract a lot of like-minded patients to me. But 9 times out of 10, I'm just being a cheerleader trying to talk them out of what the orthopedic surgeon talked them into, which was to stop moving.
Wow. Yeah, that's how that goes. So if they feel defeated and deflated, then that keeps them in their 9-to-5 job, and that works out really well for corporate America, though, right?
Right.
See, I mean, it seems like
it works out well for the pharmaceutical companies too, right?
Yeah. So anyway, before we get too much into philosophizing and down these rabbit holes, let's talk about women and weights. So, the part of the reason I organized this interview series is because I just really saw that while some women have figured it out that they need to do strength training for so many reasons, it still seems like 99% just haven't figured it out yet. And if someone's listening right now, it's because they kind of know they need to, but they don't know why. So there's probably people listening that are sort of on the fence, or they want to get better at doing what they're already doing. But let's speak to the women who are sort of apprehensive right now as to why they might be, but also why they should do it and move forward and start looking into strength training.
Right. Well, let me start by telling you a little bit about my story. I was a gymnast and a very active little kid, and I grew up in the sun in California. Then I moved to Oregon, where everything was inside because it rains all the time, and I was a teenager, so I was a punk rock girl and way into heavy metal. So I quickly started chain smoking and eating poorly and drinking too much coffee and staying inside all the time. That led me to a lot of just mental, emotional issues through my teen and college years. And I was fairly active through college, not great. I grew up in the 90s, you know, as a teenager of the 90s, and so it was in vogue to be as thin as humanly possible. So that was always the goal. Was at one point I remember wanting my entire arm to be the same circumference as my wrist. That was my goal, to be that thin, which I think did a tremendous amount of damage to my endocrine and hormonal system and to my bones and to my body. And then fast forward, I had a baby. I was not very healthy during that pregnancy. I came out of it. I was overweight. I'd never been overweight before, and I couldn't get the weight off. I was actually started medical school a couple years after having my baby, and so I spent God knows how many hours a day just sitting, ingesting massive amounts of information, and was under so much stress that I got really, really, really thin again, but I was skinny fat. And I started learning about metabolic syndrome and being skinny fat. In naturopathic school, we learned about that long before that was a popular term and long before popular medicine got a hold of it. And I remember at one point being in my early 30s, just about to graduate, having been in a terrible car accident, being in chronic pain from tip to toe, and thinking, if I fall down right now, I feel like I'm going to shatter. I felt like my bones were just going to shatter. That's how completely deconditioned I was. Everybody said I looked amazing, but I felt like hell, and my hormones were non-existent, and I looked like a skeleton. And I saw a picture of myself from the back, and I was just horrified. So fast forward again, and I'm busting my butt building a practice years later, totally neglecting myself still, weights fluctuating up and down. And finally, I just decided, okay, I have to do something. And I had ran, and I had done aerobics, and I had done swimming, and I had done all kinds of things, but I had never done strength training. And I was looking through some pictures of my sister who she struggled with obesity her whole life. And I remember in high school she got in trouble, and she was made to join the weight training team. That was her punishment. And I remember her whole persona turned around, and she got the most amazing figure during that time period. And I thought, you know what, I'm going to give that a try. I had done a lot of Pilates, which I think was very good. It was very good for my core and for keeping my pelvis intact after my car accident. But it's easy to hit a plateau with that kind of work. So I hired a strength and conditioning coach, and he was legitimately a coach, and it was a big gym. It wasn't a fluffy place. It was hardcore. It wasn't a CrossFit gym. It was just it's beautiful, but big, dirty, cold warehouse. And I went in, and he wanted to do the body composition and all that jazz. And I said, I was very thin at the time. This was just a few years ago. And I said, I don't care about my body I earn this fat. I want to keep it on me. And I'll go into that later, why I want to keep some fat on me for my hormone's sake. But I said, I just want to learn how to deadlift and squat. I want to learn big compound movements for lots of various rehabilitation reasons that had very little to do with aesthetics. I just wanted to quit hurting all the time, because at this point I developed a pretty decent chronic pain syndrome. And he laughed at me and said, I've never had a woman tell me that. And he's like, well, do you want to lose weight? Blah, blah, blah. What are your goals? I'm like, my goals are to do 20 pull-ups and 50 push-ups, and I want to deadlift like a pro. And I want to deadlift twice my body weight. And he said, all right. So that's how it started for me. And that was probably, I want to say 2.5 years ago. And I am addicted to the barbell now. It is my therapy. It's my rehabilitation. It's mental. It's everything, you know, and I've learned so much through the process that goes way beyond physical and aesthetics. I feel like I have a great figure now. I have the figure I've always dreamed I could have. But more than that, the mental integrity and strength that I've gotten for myself as a woman is unmatched. And I just wish every woman could feel this way. It's so empowering, and it's so life-changing, and it translates into every single thing I do every day. And I generally I feel like a badass now, to be honest. And I want women to experience what that feels like. I'm almost 42, and I see a lot of women my age, and I see their body compositions changing. And I know some of these women from long ago, and I know how they used to look compared to now, and I see how defeated they feel when they look at me, or patients who are younger than me, when they find out how old I am, the look of defeat on their face. And makes me so sad because they're working so hard. They're going to spin class and they're going to yoga and they're doing CrossFit and they're going like crazy and they're on the treadmill all day long. And they just keep saying, why? Why don't I look like this? And I know why. It's because they're not strength training. And so that's where my passion is with this. And in that, I've done a ton of research on the hormonal benefits of it, beyond and the neurotransmitter benefits of it, all kinds of things that go along with having good, healthy, lean skeletal muscle mass on your body. So that's where I'm coming from.
Well, that's cool. I'm trying to picture, because I used to train in a commercial gym, whereas I'm trying to always get women to, I organize this interview series because I want women lifting. And so a lot of women come in the first session with the trainer is you got to kind of brainwash them and get them to where they will want to lift weights. And then once they start to see the benefits, then it's easy and there's no going back. But
right.
You just walked in and just said it first day. So that was probably an interesting conversation for your trainer, for you to just walk in and say that.
He was shocked. I'll tell you how it started. I was going to lecture out at the chiropractic college, and I put on a dress, and my daughter came in. She was probably 12, and she said, Mom, you need to wear one of those pairs of underwear that squeeze your butt in. And I was like, what are you talking about? My rear end had always been my best asset. And I was like, what are you talking about? Spanx? And she said, yeah, you need a pair of Spanx. I'm like, oh, heck no. I shouldn't need a pair of Spanx. And she said, well, you do. You can't wear that dress. And I said, well, what's wrong? She goes, you have lady butt. And I said, what is lady butt? And she said, it's flat and it's wide. And I was a bit horrified, honestly. And so I got quickly obsessed with glutes and the quickest way to build your glutes. And I came across Brett Contreras' work, and I actually contacted him and talked. He's been great. He's been super nice. I've met with him before. And I started following his program, but I also at the same time started doing the research. My whole practice, like I said, is pain and orthopedics. I started doing the research behind the benefits of gluteal training and having strong glutes and what that does for your back and your core and everything else. And guess what? If you focus on a glute-centric workout, you end up basically training your entire body to be optimal. If you focus there, most things will fall into place, with the exception of maybe, shoulders. But everything else really ends up falling into place in a really beautiful, healthy way. And in a really rehabilitative standpoint, I don't think you could get any better for your back strength, for your back integrity. So that's when I found my trainer. I was like, I just want to build a butt. How can we do that quickly and efficiently? So he said, well, let's deadlift. And I was like, all right, let's do it.
That's awesome. So let's talk about some of the benefits of strength training.
Okay.
Whether it's body composition, building your metabolism, hormonal benefits, I'll just let you take that and go wherever you want to go with it and what you think women need to hear.
All right. Well, I'll tell you first and foremost, you've had a lot of people talk about chronic cardio and sustained cardio and versus high intensity interval training and strength training. So I'm not going to beat that one. But I tell this to my patients every time. Cardio only trains you to be better at cardio. That's the advantage. And there are some studies showing benefit to sedentary obese people. So you get somebody moving and they're going to show benefits. They're going to show benefits to their lab. I run labs on people, so I have objective markers I can show people. This isn't just about aesthetics. I can show them, look, we've got 90 days. Let's see what we can do. People who do cardio have minimal changes in their lab values. And I'm looking at things like C-reactive protein, which is a marker for inflammation. I'm looking at blood sugar and glucose handling, insulin, really important markers that are available to anybody if they just ask for it from their physician. And, figuring out what that means. I'm looking at inflammation and blood sugar handling most of the time. And then your lipids will change. All of those cholesterol levels, et cetera, will start to change for the better. Cardio really doesn't get you very far. And in fact, most of my chronic cardio patients end up with pot bellies, hormonal issues, and diabetes. I see a lot of cyclists in their 40s and 50s who do nothing but cycling or nothing but spinning or nothing but running, and they're thin and they have diabetes and they don't understand why. So that was intriguing to me as a physician. Strength training, the benefits are beyond aesthetics. I mean, first of all, you can sculpt your body. How cool is that? You can literally sculpt it to look the way you want. If you want a little more here, you just build a little more here. If you want a little less there, you just whittle a little off, by focusing on regions. Or you're the expert at that, but on body composition. But on the hormonal side of things, which I think is ultimately for women what we need to be focusing on. When I train, I always tell people I am training for my hormones. If my hormones start to get out of whack, I know quickly. But my whole goal with exercise is to tonify my hormones and optimize my hormones. That means less problems now, less health problems overall, and less need to do hormone replacement later. I'll just tell you some benefits of lean muscle mass, straight up from a medical standpoint. One, skeletal muscle mass, well-trained skeletal muscle mass, actually secretes hormones. It secretes its own estrogen and testosterone, which is amazing. We used to think that only ovaries and testes did that. So that's super cool. Second of all, it actually works as an organ of elimination. So much like your kidneys and liver detoxify you, your well-trained skeletal muscle will detoxify you as well. So we've got a hormone-producing factory that's detoxifying you. Huge benefit. Most people think of muscles as just things that move bones, right? What else does it do? Have you heard of adiponectin, the hormone adiponectin?
I have, but I don't know a lot about it. I'm not an expert on it for sure.
It's a hormone that's secreted by your fat cells, and it tells your body to burn fat. So it tells your body to burn fat. If you have low adiponectin, your fat will remain stuck in the fat cells, and it won't come out. So the idea is to optimize your adiponectin and get it as high as you can. So guess what? Resistance training increases adiponectin levels. So you've just literally given yourself a hormonal boost in the direction of fat burning. It decreases insulin or insulin resistance, which I don't know if you've talked about at all on this summit, but
I pretty much just sort of like to alley-oop the people that I interview to sort of slam dunk the information.
Yeah, okay.
But you don't even need any of that. You've got such a wealth of info. So this is exciting.
So the insulin piece is important because insulin, I would say that probably 80 to 90% of our country has insulin resistance. If you have a belly, you have insulin resistance. And the listeners can look that up and see what that means.
I don't think we've talked about insulin resistance very much at all, and it's so important.
It's so important. It's basically the idea that your blood sugars get out of whack. The cells, you need insulin's the key that allows glucose to get in the cell, and every cell is ran by glucose, which is blood sugar. At a certain point, when the body's overloaded with blood sugar, just the quick and dirty, your cells will start to cleave off your insulin receptors. So the body's pumping out more insulin to try to get the glucose into the cell because there's so much glucose floating around because of high carbohydrate diets and messed up hormone status. And then the cell's like, wait a minute, we got plenty. We're going to start cleaving off receptors. So now you are insulin resistant. So the cell thinks it's starving. The brain thinks it's starving. But the body's got plenty to go on. Insulin is pretty problematic. Insulin helps promote cancer. Insulin acts like the bouncer at the nightclub, except it locks fat in. It literally locks fat into your cells. And it also contributes to everything you eat turning into or being shuffled into your fat cells. So basically, it's a little fat protector in a nutshell. Is that clear? Does that...
Well, I think you're talking about insulin sensitivity, but also glycogen levels, and I guess we can sort of get into all that.
Well, that can get complicated, but basically, if your insulin's high, you're in a world of hurt for a lot of different reasons, and most people are walking around with high insulin levels, so they don't understand why they can't get the weight off, but it's because they've got these high levels of insulin and these low levels of adiponectin. Strength training takes care of both of those. Strength training literally creates new cells and new insulin receptors so that insulin can be available for use, which gets all that excess blood sugar out of the blood and into the cell for use. So the quickest way to battle the quickest way to battle diabetes, this is pre-diabetes I'm talking about, the quickest way to battle that is to build skeletal muscle mass. Forget the medications, forget all the commercials you see on TV. Diet's critical, of course, but the quickest way to combat diabetes, type 2 diabetes I'm talking about, is the kind that's self-induced, is to build skeletal muscle mass, lean skeletal muscle.
Yeah, so let's talk about, just while we're on the insulin issue, let's talk about nutrition and how that all kind of comes into play, because people are starting to figure out that if you overuse insulin, that it's going to lead to a lot of problems. and now insulin's like becoming the bad guy. So now, because now insulin, a lot of people think it's the bad guy, I'm seeing a lot of people abuse ketogenic diets, and that's sort of taking them the other way. So can you kind of, have you seen that a little bit?
Yes, I have. I think what I see more often is carbohydrate addicts in my practice.
Oh, it's definitely, yeah. So you got the carbohydrate addicts, and then people start kind of reading and learning a little bit, and they're like, oh, okay, there's the answer. Just take the carbohydrates out, and then they have a new set of problems.
Right. And I think ketosis done therapeutically for short periods of time is really beneficial, but I think living there can be very detrimental, particularly to women's hormones. We need some level of carbohydrate for sure. I think carbohydrates, if you have adrenal fatigue, a lot of these women do, and I think that's where chronic cardio leads you, is into adrenal fatigue. If you have adrenal fatigue and you're completely non-carb or low carb, you can really jack up your thyroid hormones, and you can really add to that adrenal fatigue. And people, I've done it. I've stayed in ketosis for way too long, and I get rail thin, and I get right in the zone for a while. I'm super clear, but then all of a sudden I start derailing, and it can lead to a lot of anxiety, a lot of anxiety for women, a lot of imbalances in mineral status in the body, all kinds of things if not done correctly. And you're right, people get militant about it. And it's, we all have different genetic variations, and I can test for these in labs, and I can tell you some people do a lot better with some carbohydrate, up to 50% of their diet. That's how they are genetically inclined. And then other people do better on a higher fat diet, but it's not a one size fits all for sure.
Yeah. So working with clients, I'm a person who recommends much lower carbs than probably what most people are used to. But can you talk about manipulation of carbohydrates a little bit? How do you how do you do it? Do you have certain rules for timing? Do you try to break down your macros for that?
What I see more often than not in women is protein deprivation. And I see that clinically in manifesting as a lot of joint pain. Most of the women who come into my practice have a lot of various joints that hurt, not just one area. Men will come in with a shoulder or a knee. Women will come in with everything hurting. And when I see that, I immediately assume protein deprivation. And I was taught by an old school MD a long time ago that women are all protein starved, and you should consider that with every female patient. So now I do, and I'll tell you they are protein starved. So I try to get them to eat more like a bodybuilder, which is, in my head, a gram of protein per pound of body weight as a goal per day. It's very hard, including myself, to get there. I'm an undereater. I've always been an undereater, and that's really hard for me. I have to kind of force feed it. So I think getting the protein in is huge. That tends to not leave as much desire for the carbohydrate. But I do know that seasonally, depending on where you live, we are meant to cycle our carbs seasonally to some degree. Right now in Oregon, it's freezing. And if I were as lean as I was this summer, I'd be freezing to death. So I up my carbs. I up my carbs during certain parts of my menstrual cycle based on need. And that's usually at the premenstrual period. They induce serotonin production. So they give you a little bit of that calm, happy feeling. So I don't cycle them as much on paper as I do leaving it up to the person. And I tell some people, some people are so insulin resistant they can't even look at a prune, and other people can handle that piece of cake once in a while. So for me, it comes down to what their labs are saying and how their blood sugar handling is going. And if it's all good, and they have to earn their carbs, and the best way to earn your carbs is through strength training, right? I mean, that is the absolute best way to earn your carbohydrates. And I definitely need more carbohydrates the harder I train, just for sake of feeling calm, not hurting as much, and having my hormones be balanced. So that's kind of where I'm coming from. I probably don't do it as much as technically as you do for body composition. I don't have any hard and fast rules about it except what the labs are telling me, and that's different for each person.
Well, confession, I don't currently break down my macros, so you get to the point where you get good enough at it and you don't have to do it anymore. In 2016, I'll probably go through a period where I do it a little bit because I want to gain some muscle mass, and I'm an ectomorph. I'm a hard gainer. I stay fairly lean, but I'm a hard muscle gainer. So, if you want to break it down in spots for a certain goal, that's fine. But as far as just like counting them out all the time, I'm not a person who thinks that you necessarily need to do that. but it is good to learn why you're doing what you're doing, as long as you don't take it too far. But you talked about strength training and how you can get away with more carbs, and I always said it like this, is that you have a lot more room for error when you start doing strength training. Your room for error goes exponentially up. Not that you should use it as an excuse to eat bad stuff all the time, but a lot of women that I've worked with are sort of just amazed at what they're able to eat and how much they're able to eat, as long as the time. I'm really big on refeeds and having things to where they're, they can be building their metabolism through sort of a calorie surplus, but if they're even if they're in a calorie deficit, most of the people that I work with are going to really go into a big calorie surplus for either a half a day or one meal, or sometimes even a full day.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and I can tell pretty quickly just looking in the mirror whether I'm going too heavy on the carbs. Within a few days I start noticing it in my trouble spots. They start to get puffy, and my face starts to get puffy. So I come from a long line of diabetics. So for me, like I said, the way that I choose to exercise and the way I choose to eat, which is I eat pretty clean. I eat pretty low carb too. I probably eat way more low carb than the average American, but much higher than a person who does, the ketogenic diet. But I notice very quickly when I'm having too much of it. So I have to dial it down. And I check my labs regularly, and I prefer to keep fasting serum insulin between 2 and 5 for most patients. And so for me, I just check my insulin levels or my hemoglobin A1C, which is another marker for blood sugar, and I can tell pretty quickly whether I've been overdoing it or not.
Overdoing it on too many carbs?
Yeah. And I think fat is so critical. Healthy fats are what you make your hormones out of. So having a healthy fat diet and having a high protein diet are my goals. And when you get enough of those in, there's not a lot of room for carbs. You just aren't hungry enough for them. There's just not a lot of room for them. Yeah,
so people will start restricting carbs, and a lot of times I see them they'll just try eating protein alone, because there's only 3 macros. We got our protein, we got our fat, we got our carbs, and they'll actually pull carbs out. And if they don't immediately start eating more fat, then their blood sugar is going to drop, and they will fall on their face and start hitting the carbs hard. Again, can you talk about fat and why, if you do it right, it doesn't actually make you fat?
Fat burns fat. And I've been saying that since I was in medical school, and nobody understood, or everybody wants to debate me on it. Basically, I think of it in terms of hormone and brain health. Here's the cool thing about the medicine that I do. I'm looking for the root cause of somebody's issues. And so a treatment protocol for the brain is ironically similar to a treatment protocol for the heart, which is ironically similar to the treatment protocol for painful joints. It's all the same thing. It's really reducing inflammation and keeping hormones optimized. So first of all our cells are made out of fat. It's a fatty lipid bilayer. And if you're hydrated well enough, which most people are not hydrated, that's another issue I have, but the cellular membrane has all these receptors on it, like I mentioned, and it's fluid, and it moves really nicely, and it lets things in and out as it should. And so we need enough cholesterol to keep that functional. Your whole brain is just one big blob of soft fat. It's like butter. It's like a nice, healthy grass-fed butter consistency. And I've seen them. I've taken them out of cadavers, and they are very soft. So you need fats to have a healthy brain, and you need fats to have your neurotransmitters in your brain working. People with low cholesterol, like the cholesterol levels most physicians try to get people down to, like 140, 150, those people have a way higher rate of death, cancer, and accidents. So forget that.
Yeah, that's interesting you say that, because you'll see studies cited talking about elevated cholesterol and linking it to heart disease, but then you actually go down and you see cholesterol that's lower, like you're talking about. And as far as just incidence of death, have you read the book The Great Cholesterol Con?
Yeah, it's crazy. Crazy.
Yeah, for people, that's a good. Would you recommend that? I would totally recommend that for people that doubt that at all.
Absolutely, and I think this year the AMA, the American Medical Association, finally came out. I don't know if you heard about this. I didn't believe I was going to live to see the day, but the AMA came out and said fats are not the problem. Cholesterol is not the enemy. And I don't know why it's not been all over the news. If you go on Medscape, which is the AMA's website, you can find it. Cholesterol is not the enemy, and the lipid war is over. Yet, Lipitor the statin drug, Lipitor, is the number one selling drug in America. So of course we're not going to see that splashed all over the news because that's not good for business. But yeah, I mean, the war on fat is over. So beyond that, most of your hormones, your cortisol, your progesterone, your testosterone, and your estrogen, and your DHEA are made from cholesterol. So you have to have adequate levels of cholesterol to make your hormones. And you have to have healthy, balanced hormones to keep yourself lean and mean and strong and fat-free. So it starts with proper ingestion of healthy fats, in my opinion. And so I'm always trying to get people to eat more fat. And fat's very satiating. So you get enough fat in you, you feel calm, you feel happy. The second I start feeling anxious, I just take a big old spoonful of grass-fed butter or coconut oil on a spoon, eat it, I feel better, or some fish oil. You get enough of that in you and you get enough protein, and there's really not a lot of room for refined carbs and junk carbs. So that's usually my goal with patients, is just keeping it simple and trying to get them to, I might put them in ketosis originally to get the weight kick-started, the weight loss kick-started, but generally I just want them to do probably a 40-40-30. I mean, I'm not too restrictive. I want them 40% fat, 40% protein, and 30% carbs. Kind of depends, though, if they're skitsy, maybe a little higher carb.
You know, what's funny is I'll do this because in a ketogenic diet, the first thing that's going to happen is that muscle glycogen is going to empty out, and with that, a lot of water. So people see a lot of, especially women, they see a nice little weight drop the first week, and they don't realize that a lot of that is actually just glycogen and water. Yeah. As that glycogen empties out, and it's not necessarily fat loss, maybe a little bit of it. But even though they don't know that a lot of times, the fact that they sort of build that psychological momentum with the ketogenic diet in the first week or two, now they see results, so now they're more excited, and then the results keep going. So I almost don't even want to tell them that's what's going to happen. I want them to just see the weight for the ones that like to connect that reward to their actual actions.
That's the same here. You have to gain a client or a patient's trust, and they want to see some results. I also don't love restricting food from people. I think it gives people a little bit of a panicky feeling when they are told they cannot eat something. And so I try to add in. So I try to get them to focus on leafy greens because that helps develop a healthy gut microbiome, which is important. And I try to get them to up the protein and the fat, and that leaves very little room for carbohydrate. They're just too full. And I tell them to quit with the refined carbs, first off. And that right there. And then I'll say, I want you to eat a ton of coconut oil. I mean, really just start pounding it almost to tolerance so that before you get a stomach ache. And you're right. They get that nice little, they lean out a little bit. They feel like they've kick-started things. They feel like something's happening. And that's inspiring for them to keep going.
Yeah. Oh, so I think it was someone from the American Heart Association. They didn't, and this was probably 6 months ago I read this, they said that they needed to change the recommendations for what the fat intake is, but they said something about how there's not enough research out there and not enough money to do the research yet to dictate how much fat is actually safe, and that's why they haven't changed the recommendations yet. Something like that.
And there's, when you start looking at least in animal studies, high-fat diets can be detrimental if, in the presence of, and this is only in rats that they've looked at this, but they looked at rats who they fed all day long, so people who were eating all day long, which I'm not a big fan of, those rats actually got fatty liver on a high-fat diet. And then in the presence of carbohydrate, and they didn't say how much carbohydrate, a higher fat diet could also lead to fatty liver. And fatty liver is just one of the sequelae of this metabolic syndrome I was talking about. You don't want a fatty liver. Although the quickest way to get rid of a fatty liver, which most Americans have, is strength training.
Imagine that. It's the cure-all fountain of youth.
It literally is. It literally is the answer to almost everything. And I guess for me in medicine, I got so far into neurotransmitter testing and hormonal testing and all fancy genetic testing and all this fancy stuff I was doing with my patients. And none of it works or sticks if the basics aren't handled. And those basics are strength training and sleep and clean water. That's what my ebook's on. It's just the basics, some of the more basic things that people don't think about. If those aren't dealt with on a regular basis, a daily basis, a lifestyle change, then all the fancy hormone replacement and pills and supplements, and none of that works, you know? If you don't have good muscle to fat ratios on your body, and if you don't sleep enough, and if you're not drinking enough clean filtered water, and if you're not eating the right macros, what's the point? You know, you're just wasting money on a bunch of stuff.
You know what would be a really good topic for us to talk about is women who fear taking in sodium and fluid balance and what that can do with depression, what training can do with that, but also the fact that your sodium intake is going to have to go up once you start strength training. I think a lot of women out there are still kind of in that they fear sodium. So can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I love salt. I'm such a salt fan. I salt my water. I salt my butter. I salt everything. I think the key, first of all, is that there's a big difference between sea salt or a complete salt product, which has a variety of minerals in it, versus table salt, mined salt, salt that came out of a mine, which is just sodium chloride. So mined salt is not good. It imbalances all of your cells run on a sodium potassium pump. That's how cells get things in and out of them. And you need the potassium piece, right? It can't just be the sodium. So sodium chloride alone from mined table salt is no good. But sea salt or a complete salt or Himalayan salt, something like that, that's wonderful. It's so tonifying for your adrenal glands. And your adrenal glands, if they're not working well, none of your other hormones will work well. So they'll all just bonk eventually. So adrenal health is really the key. And again, strength training is tonifying for adrenal health, if not done in a crazy, you know, and I don't mean to diss CrossFit, but it's just too fast. It's too stimulating for most people's adrenals that are like my patient base. So I try to get everybody to add salt in, salt away. And for me, I just come at them from the adrenal standpoint. So, and that cellular level of having your cells work for you versus not work for you.
Can you talk about building metabolism through strength training and being able to actually take in more calories over time? Because it sounds like when you had your baby, you gained weight after that, but I'm guessing if you were to have a baby now, you've got such a better metabolism that you wouldn't even hardly see weight gain.
Yeah, I'd like to think. Well, I'll be honest with you. I say this to my patients freely. I didn't even realize it until I kind of knew, and I knew it at more times than others, but I think I've suffered from an eating disorder my entire life. I can't remember a time when I didn't have an eating disorder, and strength training has literally cured me of it, of 30 years of, I either had anorexia or bulimia or orthorexia. I mean, orthorexia is a real issue, and I don't know if you've heard that term, but that's where people get so overzealous about eating well that it actually becomes an eating disorder. And I mean, I was afraid to eat out at restaurants. I was afraid to go out with people because I was eating so clean that I didn't feel like I could live in the world. I mean, and that was definitely orthorexia. So for me, I can eat now. I can eat. I can eat as much as I want to on certain days without any consequence, you know, and I still eat clean. I still make everything I put in my mouth is a choice because it's either healthful or it's a poison, in my opinion. So I don't really eat much sugar. I'm not big on all that stuff. It makes me feel bad. But I think metabolically speaking, you know, you get the afterburn with strength training. So when you're building skeletal muscle mass, you get an afterburn. So you get caloric burning for hours and hours and hours to days longer than with cardio. You just get what you get at the time. That's it, you know, and then you're fatigued and you want to eat a bunch of carbs. But with strength training, you get this afterburn effect. So there you go, right off the bat. You've just upregulated your metabolism. I'll tell you, people who strength train regularly definitely need less thyroid hormone. I can decrease their thyroid dose. I've done it for myself, and I've done it for several patients. So we know thyroid's in charge of the metabolism. So we know metabolically things are working better because they don't need as much thyroid to get their labs in order and to get their symptoms to be gone. And then, you know, muscle eats fat. Muscle literally eats fat. So eating a high-fat diet eats fat and muscle eats fat. So having enough fat on board in your diet and having enough skeletal muscle mass on your body, you're basically in a metabolic Eden. You're doing the best. That is the best way to get the most optimized metabolism for an individual. And your metabolism is different than my metabolism, is different from all my patients. But ideally, you want to be able to get your engines running and keep them running while you're sleeping, while you're awake. I'll tell you what, too, I'm so much warmer with a layer of muscle on me. I actually don't freeze to death every winter because I have muscle is warm and it's very metabolically active.
We're going much deeper into the science with this interview. I think you're the only doctor on here, but what's interesting is most doctors don't talk like you. So
no,
find that
most of them don't know this stuff.
No, they don't. They absolutely don't. I know that because I have clients who are doctors, and I sometimes assume that they know things. And
I just geek out on this stuff because I'm obsessed with it because it's worked for me and it's worked. I'm looking for the quickest route to get patients better. So anyway, just a brief side. Cytokines are inflammatory chemicals that your body produces. Your fat cells make them predominantly. So the more fat you have on you, the more inflamed you tend to be. So cytokines are bad. They cause a lot of pain and inflammation and they're important too. We don't want to completely cut them out, but they tend to be pro-inflammatory. Myokines are secreted by muscle cells, and they are anti-inflammatory molecules. And the same, like interleukin-6 is a compound that is more often than not in studies considered a pro-inflammatory cytokine. When secreted by muscle tissue, it's actually a myokine. It's anti-inflammatory. So having muscle tissue on your body, the more of it you have, the more anti-inflammatory molecules you're secreting. You're literally a little anti-inflammatory factory. When most Americans are eating a pro-inflammatory diet and walking around in a cellular pro-inflammatory state. So that's pretty cool.
That is very cool.
It's a big benefit because most chronic disease processes you can blame on inflammation as the start. So that's cool. That's another benefit of having skeletal muscle mass.
Yeah, and back to what you said about getting your metabolism to be working while you're sleeping or while you're sitting on the couch. If I've said this once, I've said it a million times, is that you got to stop working for your metabolism and start employing it to where it starts working for you. Otherwise, having a lean body,
I like it.
It's futile to try to have a lean body if you're just trying to work to burn calories.
Yes. And I think on that, something I really want to emphasize is I really hate the word weight loss or fat loss because I think that as women, that's all we're taught from day one is weight loss, fat loss, weight loss, fat loss. And what most women don't understand is that most of your hormones are they're being secreted by your adrenal glands. That's why they're important, and your ovaries, but your fat layer can work for you as an endocrine organ. And when men are too fat or when men have bellies, not only are they secreting those cytokines out of their fat cells, but that belly fat is turning their testosterone into estrogen. So having a belly is no good for a man. And for a woman, it can be very pro-inflammatory as well. But having a little bit of fat layer on you is critical for having balanced hormones. And I had a patient once who had a tummy tuck. She was about my size, and she had a tummy tuck, and she went batshit crazy. And we couldn't figure it out, but she had cut off her little estrogen depot, that little pooch that I actually try to keep around now. I always say your six pack can be very expensive metabolically and hormonally to you. I'm not after a six pack anymore like I used to be. I'm not after as skinny as I can or as lean as I can be because I want to keep my hormones functioning. And being somewhere around 20% to 22 is actually percent body fat is optimal for women and their hormones, especially as they get into my age group. So, and walking into menopause and perimenopause. So don't be afraid of having a little fat on you. If you're competing, that's a different story, but as well as I do that a lot of those figure competitors and bikini competitors, they get a little wonky at the end there. They get a little cuckoo sometimes. I've had a few as patients and they stop menstruating and their mental emotional state gets a little rugged for a while, So having some fat on you is not a bad thing. And I always encourage women to focus on strength gains and not fat loss.
Yeah, because once they build enough muscle, they're going to be walking around burning so much more fat. Some of these competitors, it's a sad story after the competition and how much fat gain comes back. Some of them are just absolutely wrecking their metabolisms.
Oh, completely. And I used to treat a lot of MMA fighters, and those guys having to cut weight so fast, their testosterone and their hormones just tank, and your thyroid just quits working, period. And then you're on a lifetime of hormone replacement, it's not a pretty picture. So I finally came to terms with my belly, and I have a little belly, and I don't care. and I appreciate it because, and I want to have some boobs, and I want to have some butt on me, because that's what keeps my hormones happy. And that's what is going to help me the most walking into menopause, because that's what's coming next for me. You know, I'm at that age. So, and I'm fine with it. And I think a lot of women get into menopause either obese and estrogen dominant, which is a mess, or they're rail thin and they hurt all over, and menopause is a nightmare. So a little bit of fat is not a bad thing.
Well, and guys kind of like that too.
Exactly.
On a woman.
I know, right? That's what I told my trainer when I walked in and I met him. I was like, I earned these boobs and this butt, so let's keep them. I just want to deadlift and squat and do pull-ups. So
yeah, well, so this is so can you talk about, I've had women who, and I think we've talked about it once in this interview series, after about 6 weeks of strength training, they'll start talking about their sex drive going like through the roof. So can you talk about that and why that happens hormonally? You're the hormone expert.
Yeah, well, strength training is, we know in men particularly, but strength training, and this is the other hormonal benefit that I'm always after, is it induces human growth hormone release and testosterone. So most women are a little testosterone deficient as they get to be my age. So you give a woman a little bit of testosterone and you build her a little bit of muscle, and things get much better for her libido, for sure. And for healing and for pain reduction and for sanity. Honestly, testosterone is very calming to the mind. So strength training induces testosterone and human growth hormone production, and cardio does not. In fact, cardio tanks both of those out. Sleep is critical for inducing human growth hormone production. I think most people are completely skimping on their sleep, and you can't get any kind of gains muscularly if you're not sleeping. So I just want to throw that in. And something interesting, a study I read, they looked at barbell back squats, free barbell back squats versus the leg press. And the free barbell back squats induced crazy percent, I can't remember exactly, but crazy percent higher testosterone and human growth hormone production than the leg press did. So the machines are not necessarily where it's at. It's using your body to do these compound movements that are really the most hormonally beneficial, I think. That's just me personally. I know a lot of people like the machines, and that's kind of a gateway into strength training, but machines really kind of get you stuck in, they isolate certain body areas, so you don't get it, the body as a whole needs to move mechanically, I think.
Well, not to mention, like specifically with the leg press, I see a lot of people rounding their lumbar spine on that and absolutely wrecking their back. So I'm not really big on the leg press. This is actually really cool. You can talk about hormonally, but you can also talk about the spine because you're a chiropractor as well. So there's so much that we can talk about right now. So I'm in a position where I don't even know where to start. There's so many things that I can ask you because there's so much information that you have to get out to the listeners. But yeah, let's talk about things on the chiropractic side. We talked a little bit offline. Chiropractic totally changed my life. And I'd been going to chiropractors for years, but I finally found the right one, the right fit, who would listen to me, who would really try to get, like how you said, get to the root. You always have to get to the root issue or nothing even matters. So can you talk about chiropractic a little bit and what that's really all about?
Well, it's in my head, it's just the idea. I feel like we're trained as musculoskeletal experts, and I hang with a lot of orthopedic docs, and they don't have a lot on me, honestly. I feel like my education in that area was excellent. We train on neurophysiology quite a bit, and so the two of those together, I think a body problem, a pain problem, or a musculoskeletal problem, chiropractors are the experts, and those are the ones to go to. Our palpation and hands-on skills are unmatched, and I've hung out with every kind of doctor out there, and it is unmatched what we can feel and do with our hands. I think that's what makes me such a good injector, is because I have these excellent palpatory skills. You need things to be in alignment, and that doesn't mean you have to go all the time. If you have an acute injury or you have something that needs to be worked on and they ask you to come in for a certain amount of time, that's reasonable. But more often than not, if you're strength training and you are keeping those joints healthy by building strong, healthy muscles around them, generally you stay in alignment better. So that's a huge advantage to keeping yourself fit in that regard. I just think of us as musculoskeletal experts, and people say, I don't believe in chiropractics. It's like, you don't believe in biomechanics? It's just biomechanics. If you hit a pothole and your tires go wonky and you're driving around weird and you have to go have your tires realigned, it's the exact same thing in my head. We're just realigning like saying areas.
They don't believe in a joint being able to move through its range of motion. You don't believe in joint movement?
Exactly. I don't think people understand it, though. And the first thing everyone's told to do by most doctors when they hurt a joint is to stop moving it, right? Which is the absolute worst thing you can do. Motion is lotion and movement is medicine. And so I have to talk all my patients into moving because out of fear, they've frozen themselves up. And the minute you stop moving a joint or it gets stuck in a certain position because of fascial adhesions or whatever, it starts to, joints only are nutritionally sound and heal if nutrients are moving in and out. And the only way for nutrients to move in and out is through movement of that joint. So a great example of a simple chiropractic need was the other day I was squatting and I don't know what I did, but I felt my hip bone, my femoral head, it just kind of tweaked a little bit. And I couldn't do certain motions. I couldn't put my legs in a butterfly position. Like something was definitely wrong. So I went in and saw my chiropractor because I have one too. And all he did was internally rotate my femur and drop down a little bit, and it went kerthunk, and it just set itself back in the joint. It wasn't out of joint. It wasn't dislocated. It was just slightly off, and it was really causing me a lot of pain in my squat. But just a little, it's just a little tweak here and there. And if people are healthy, I'll tell you something else, especially in men. I adjust a lot of really big guys, and people say, oh, you're so little. How can you adjust those big guys? Well, those big guys all eat really well, and they're all really fit, and they all have good muscle mass. Easiest people to adjust. The hardest people to adjust are these skinny little women who don't do anything but cardio. The cardio junkies who don't do anything else, they're so inflamed, it's like hitting a springboard when I try to adjust them. It hurts. But the big dudes, I can adjust them all day because they eat well, they move well, they do like a lot of jiu-jitsu guys and stuff like that. Those guys are so easy to adjust. All the joints just move the way they're supposed to because they're not terribly locked up and they're not terribly inflamed.
Yeah, my joints, I think they move pretty well because when I get adjusted, a lot of times my chiropractor, there's two different ones that will work on me. They'll be like, wow, that was a loud one. I adjust really loud when I go in there. And so I was going twice a week for about 6 or 7 months, and now I've kind of went into more maintenance, and I actually stopped going. I live in St. Louis. I'm getting ready to move to San Diego. Well, since the cold weather came around probably 6 weeks ago here in St. Louis, my neck started getting tight again, and I actually went this morning and got adjusted, and I feel so great, especially my cervical spine. I couldn't look to the left very well last night when I was laying in bed, and I thought, okay, I need to go back in, and he adjusted me, and I feel great. And I almost can feel more nutrition getting to my spine. I feel like I'm really aware of my body. I really try to have a sense of listening to my body when it comes to nutrition and working out as well, but no, my whole body feels so much better from going in and getting worked on today.
Well, and beyond just having your joints put back into the right position, or just, I shouldn't say that, it's inducing proper movement, getting them to move and to be more aligned. You're affecting the nervous system by adjusting a joint. And there's that's pretty technical. I don't want to get into it, but you literally are affecting the nervous system at the cord level, not by touching it or banging it, but neurologically by affecting that joint. You're affecting the spine, which is affecting the brain. And you're right. There's a reason why people move to the sun, why snowbirds go there, because when it gets cold, there's definitely a physiologic effect on the joints. In fact, this summer, my business was so dead and I couldn't figure it out. I've never had a lull like that in 10 years of practice. And it was because we had the hottest summer on record in Portland. It was so hot and dry. It was like Arizona. And finally we were like, nobody hurts. There's nobody in pain. There's no one to come see me.
Oh, wow.
But, I was born in St. Louis. That's funny. That's where you live.
Yeah.
My dad's from there.
Oh, wow. Where at? What part?
You guys got some, Florissant, I think is where I was born, but we lived in St. Louis. But you guys get some cold weather. Ugh.
I'm not a fan of it.
I can't complain.
I'm starting to come up with this theory that humans were not meant to inhabit the Midwest in the winter months.
And, here in Portland, it's just rain, which is a whole different story on your joints and bones and hormones. Just having that much cold wetness is like that's a whole nother issue. But speaking of chiropractics and strength training, I just think the one thing that most women really need to look at, and the way that I get a lot of women to finally act is because of bone health. And I call it skinny white girl syndrome. If you're a skinny white girl, you're going to get osteoporosis. That's just the way it is. And so doing everything that I can to combat that from happening, that process. And really the absolute best way to do that is through strength training, resistance training, period. I mean, it's really the only way to do it, to be honest.
Seems like all roads are leading to strength training here.
Right. And eating a healthful diet. I mean, it's really, really clear that a lot of arthritis and a lot of bone degradation is due to poor diet and high sugar intake. So those two things together are key. And the way that I get most of my 50-something-year-old women to start taking me seriously is like, if you fall, you're going to break your hip. And most people who break their hips end up in the hospital and die of pneumonia. That's just the way it goes. When you're elderly and you break a hip, it's kind of the kiss of death. So breaking a hip is a big, big deal. And it's people don't usually return, even if they live through it, they do not come out the same. So if there's anything if there's any way to inspire a woman to get moving, it's that. And women don't think about it, but you start to lose bone mass and muscle mass very quickly starting around age 30. And it has everything to do with your activity level, but also how you were fed up until that point. So for most of us growing up on kind of this, industrialized diet of fast food and crap like I was, and then being stagnant through several decades of life, that's a recipe for disaster in older age. But people don't want to think about older age. They just want to think about being skinny or fat loss or whatever. And being really thin is very dangerous to your bones. If your hormones are screwed up, your bones are screwed up, period. If you have wrinkles on your face at a young age, that's a reflection of the state of your bones. So just something else to consider.
Whether it's fear of breaking a hip or if it's someone wants good body composition, yeah, I don't care which way you go with it, whatever it takes to get women in there lifting weights, right?
Right. Plus it just makes you feel like Wonder Woman, which is awesome. You actually feel empowered. Like I said, there's just a take no shit attitude that I've kind of always had, but I didn't have the body to back up my big attitude. And now I do. Now I walk in a room and the respect I garner from my colleagues and my peers and just other people in the room, people just do not mess with me because as my friend said, he's like, you're not thin, you're built. And I'm built. I built this, and I feel very proud of that. And it carries into my posture is significantly improved. When you have a strong posterior chain, you stand up straight and you own your position in the room, which is something women do not do. We're taught to be quiet and sheep away and curl up and be quiet. And not that we need to be loudmouths, but I think if we have a presence, we should have a presence. And being strong is the best way to get there.
It's
just being strong.
Yeah, it's interesting that you got to the place that you're at now because women will fear bulking up and they fear fat, and a lot of times they'll fear salt, but you literally put salt in your water, you eat lots of fat, and you lift heavy weights, and somehow you've gotten to where you have a lean, athletic type physique from doing all that, which a lot of people think that it would get you to the exact opposite place.
Right, I know. I tell my patients to eat more steak and dark chocolate and salt their food, and they look at me like I'm nuts, and lift heavy weights, and especially the men, and they're like, what? Are you serious? I like you. That's great, because they're getting told the exact opposite at most doctors' offices. They're being told to cut the red meat, and here, go on the blood pressure medication at age 30, and avoid the salt, and do cardio. That's what they all get told, and then they end up in my office in pain and overweight.
You know what's funny is I won't go to a doctor who doesn't lift weights. I literally won't, because all the ones that I've had good experiences with, like the chiropractor, I'd went for years and years, but my chiropractor now, he lifts a lot of weights. He really believes in it. I won't go to a doctor now who doesn't lift weights because they're missing something that's so obvious and fundamental and huge. And I can't sit there and think that they're not missing a lot of other stuff too. Yep,
I completely agree. I really feel like you have to walk the talk, and I do. And I really do. And I have gone through every procedure I have done on my patients, and every treatment I've ever tried on my patients. I put myself through it just to see what it was like. And I really believe, as a naturopathic physician and as a chiropractor, I am a walking billboard for my practice, and I better look it. And when I go to conferences amongst my colleagues, I'm watching a lot of my colleagues get really battered down. Medicine's kind of a tough field to be in right now emotionally for most doctors, and a lot of people are burning out, and they're looking haggard, and they're gaining weight, and they're just, they sit in a chair all day and listen to people's problems. And it's like, I've got to offset that by going to the gym.
I was just reading a study the other day about I think it was young doctors, and how it seemed like, I think they said like almost 40% of them suffer from depression or signs of depression. I don't know. I read it and I thought, wow, that's pretty high.
It's the highest suicide rate of any profession is physician. But, you know, I mean, at the end of the day, I can tell my patients with conviction something that I feel strongly about, and they usually listen to me. And I had a woman arguing with me incessantly the other day about cardio and this and that. I finally just stood up. I just stood up and I looked down at my body and I looked at her and I said, I am not trying to be condescending, but I promise you I figured something out because you're about 6 years younger than me. And I promise you, I'm not lying to you. I am living proof. And she started laughing and she's like, okay, fine, I'll listen. You know, but I just feel like, plus being strong physically makes you mentally tough, and it's mentally challenging to get strong. You really have to, you know, go in there and commit to working through some stuff, and it's meditative, and that's how I meditate. I don't sit still very well, so, you know, throwing some iron around is very meditative for me. I just think the mental component of this is such a big deal for women, and I think it's something that you just don't get out of cardio. You get it with yoga, I think, you know, to some degree, but getting strong it makes you tough.
To me, you almost sounded like Floyd Mayweather for a second. I could talk the talk and I could walk the walk, as he says.
Oh, God.
Well, so what I'm getting at is that strength training will give you a certain type of a swag.
I think so. And maybe it's just because I'm getting older and I feel better in my skin. There's something beautiful about turning 40. You just stop caring so much about what anyone thinks. You're just like, yeah, whatever. And you stop picking your body parts apart because you got what you got. That's the truth. You got, you know, if you don't like your toes, too bad. Those are the toes you got. You got what you got, so you might as well make the best out of it. And the proof is in the pudding, because I keep running into people from my past, and they're like, "Oh my gosh, you look great." And if you look at pictures of me in the past, my face was puffy. Even if I was thin, I had a belly. My face was puffy. You know, I just composition-wise and my lab values, I just wasn't in great shape. So, you know, and you don't have to do a lot. If you keep a good, strong, muscular build, you don't have to worry too much, like you said, about you got to eat quality foods, but it's not so much a concern of like quantity and watching every little detail, unless you're competing. But generally, you can eat pretty freely and comfortably, and your body will tell you what it needs, and you just have to listen. And, you know, I don't know. It's pretty much a win all around.
Yeah, so a few weeks ago, I'm really big on strategic refeed meals, and I went with pizza a few weeks ago. And when I ordered it, they said, "Did you want a 2-liter of soda or some special, whatever?" And I really don't drink soda, but I felt insane that day, apparently. And I was like, yeah, sure. And I drank like a 2-liter of Sierra Mist, and I woke up the next day, and my eyes were insanely puffy. I looked like I was sick from having sugar one day.
I always tell patients, sugar is Satan. Sugar is bad news. It is such a drug, and it's legal, and it is so abused in this country. It's insane. Oh, the whole world, actually. You know, most drugs light up a certain neurotransmitter in your brain. So, like, wine will upregulate this, and whiskey will upregulate dopamine and serotonin, but sugar lights up your whole brain. It lights up every neurotransmitter. It is such a drug. And people don't realize it until they try to quit, and they can't. So
for a second, I thought you were trying to sell me on sugar. That was kind of sounded good for a second there.
Sugar is so bad. I always say sugar is Satan and insulin is its minions. So if there's one thing people could do today to benefit themselves, it's to get off sugar. And the joints, I look at people's joints under ultrasound and x-ray, and people's joints who are sugar addicts are gnarly. They're just gnarly, and they're bad shape. So that's how I prove it to them. I'm like, hey, I bet your knee looks like this. And I show them, I'm like, yep, are you a sugar addict? And they go, I am. I'm like, yep, I could have guessed. So if you want to decrease your joint pain and your arthritis, it's a good thing to get off of.
I feel like when I go to a big commercial gym and I see all these people on the steady state cardio equipment, I almost feel like it's a little bit like a zombie apocalypse.
Totally. Totally. That's so funny. I always talk to my friends about, you're going to laugh, but I always tell them, they're like, what are you training for? I'm like, the zombie apocalypse. And they say, what do you mean? I'm like, if you can climb stuff and get away from them really fast, you're good. If you can't climb, if you don't have any grip strength, most women don't have very good grip strength. Did you see that study on grip strength and longevity?
Mm-mm.
They proved that people with poor grip strength died at significantly higher rates than people who had good grip strength. And
That
they
makes me feel good.
Yeah. So, and women in particular, you probably know this better than I do. You're the one training them, but women have usually very poor grip strength. So, yeah, if you can climb stuff and get away, that's why I want to do pull-ups, right? So I can climb away from the zombies.
Yeah, it's interesting. Deadlifting, one thing I like about it is it exposes weak links in the body. Mm-hmm. And I don't really see it with guys where everything is so strong that they could lift the weight, but their grip just can't hold on to the bar physically. But I will see it with women where the rest of their body is strong enough to where they could move the weight, but it's the grip that ends up being the weakest link. And I would say that, I don't want to throw out numbers, but what I'll say is this: I've never seen that happen with a guy, and I've seen it happen with a lot of women. So women definitely, just on watching them deadlift, proportionally, it's not just because, women don't have the upper body strength that men have. Proportionally, their grip is just way, way less than what men's is.
Yeah, it's bad. My friend he owns a CrossFit gym here in Portland, and he is a strength and conditioning coach. And I said something about women and grip strength. He goes, well, you know what people without good grip strength are, aren't you? And I said, what? And he goes, it's called food. Like, basically, they're food for something else. Because, again, if you can't grab something and get away, I don't think people realize that. Another thing is just
food.
They're food. They're food for something else, maybe zombies. But another thing is just being able to get up and down off the floor. As people age, I see a lot of baby boomers in my practice, and one of the things I ask them is, can you squat over a toilet and urinate without having to sit on it? And most people tell me no. And then another one is can you get up and down off the floor easily? And a lot of people will tell me no. And I'm looking at them like, if you fall, what are you going to do? Like, what are you going to do if you can't get up? Especially if you break a hip or hurt yourself. If you don't have enough strength to get yourself up and moving. And, plus muscle mass just makes you harder to kill, right? Being strong and dense, you're just harder to kill, period. Those people survive. I've had patients come in who've been shot. I've had patients come in who've been in horrible car accidents. And the ones who have good muscle mass hold together. And the ones who don't literally just disintegrate. Ligaments and tendons just rip off bones. And they have chronic pain for life. So that's yet another reason to keep yourself strong and fit.
The strong people are harder to kill, especially in like powerlifting gyms, is being said. There's so many posters and it's being said so much that it's almost getting to where it's like a cliche statement, but it's so true.
It's so true. I knew a girl who literally got shot by accident, supposedly. A guy in her community was cleaning his gun, and the gun went off and hit her like 2 blocks away.
He went with that excuse? That's like the oldest one in the book.
I know, in her abdomen, and she was so fit that the doctors couldn't believe it. They said you should have just blown up. I mean, you should have bled out and died. But they said repeatedly the only reason you survived was because you were so muscular and so fit.
Have you seen Blues Brothers?
Yeah.
Wasn't there a line in there about that guy that killed a bunch of people? And he's like, I was cleaning my gun.
Yeah.
I think it was Blues Brothers.
So. I know. I don't know what this guy was doing, but and I see a lot of car accident patients, and most people are so deconditioned that they are hanging off their ligaments and tendons. And the area where the ligaments and tendons meet bone is called the enthesis point, and it's highly innervated. And so that's what I treat all day with the injection therapies I do. But when you have no muscle mass and you're hanging off your joints like that, or you're hanging off your spine, or you're hanging off your low back with every movement, you're literally you're in chronic pain all the time because you're pulling on these enthesis points at all times. When you have muscle mass around those areas, the muscles hold you together, and you don't get as much chronic pain. Plus, mechanoreceptors override pain receptors. So moving in a strategic way, like strength training, will actually decrease people with chronic pain, their issues, so much better than doing something like cardio. And I always tell patients, you have to earn your cardio. How many people do you see that are super deconditioned and overweight and they go out running and it's like a disaster? It's violent. It's violent on their joints. But if you're really strong and fit and held together densely, you can afford to go out and run without much damage to your joints. But people do the exact opposite. They're like, I want to get back in shape. I'm going to run a marathon. And I'm like, oh, It's the worst thing you could do. And those people end up with knee issues and hip issues and you name it. So.
Yeah, I hate it when I hear of a client who I finally got them to stop doing so much steady state cardio, and then they stop it and they're like, oh, I'm going to go do this 5K, but it's just once. And then it's like, now your body's not even used to it, and you're just jumping in, and they usually come back with knee and hip pain after doing that.
It's violent. I'm looking at people's biomechanics and gait all the time, so I see people running down the street, and the ones who are not fit and strong, it looks violent to me. It's like watching some of those shows where people get hurt and everyone laughs. They show videos. I'm looking at people running on the treadmills, and when people give me any slack about, I like doing cardio, I don't want to do weights, I just tell them straight up, why don't you go to the gym and tell me where the people that look how you want to look are? Are they on the treadmills? Are they on the zombie apocalypse corner over there running? Or are they over by the weights, the free weights? Because I guarantee they're either in the spin class or they're over running like just sweating to death. I just want to grab them.
I mean, just you hear that clank, clank. I always say that sound. You can just hear the frustration and the joints being destroyed right here in front of us.
It's violent, and they are just so sweaty, and they look so tired. And I'm like, dude, if you had 45 minutes, I could show you a way more efficient way to reach your goals than that, because that is just a waste of time. But, I mean, it gets the cardio part, but it really can be, if they're looking for fat loss, it's a waste of time, as you know, so.
Well, not just that, but it's gonna eat away at their lean muscle tissue, and we talked about how that's part of what is going to help build their resting metabolic rate. So now they might burn a little bit of fat, but the muscle that they burn away from doing that, over time, it's just going to chip away at their resting metabolic rate, and then they're going to end up becoming just skinny fat now. So if you want to get skinny fat and have really bad joints, do steady state cardio. Oh, and be very hungry for carbs. I've always said this too, is that steady state cardio isn't good for improving body composition, but it will make you crave the shit out of some carbs.
True.
Burn carbs, eat carbs. Burn carbs, eat carbs. Nothing ever changes, except for you're going to have less muscle and worse joints.
And I think the most important thing for hormones with cardio, what I always think of is cardio is pro-inflammatory. So strength training is to some degree, and I don't want to get too much into the science of that, because there's a train and rest kind of thing with strength training that actually optimizes your nervous system and your hormones. But cardio, especially overdoing it, which most people do, it raises cortisol, and it's pro-inflammatory. And so when you raise cortisol and you put your body in a pro-inflammatory state, guess what happens? You pack on belly fat and you keep belly fat. So these people are doing cardio, trying to lose weight, and all they're doing is perpetuating the cycle. And so the patients come in and they're like, but I'm doing da-da-da-da all the time. Why do I still have this gut? I'm like, your cortisol is through the roof. And it's just a pro-inflammatory vicious cycle. And cortisol is also catabolic. It chews up your tissues. So it's eating your lean muscle mass. It's eating your connective tissues on your joints. It's eating your brain. And it's just creating belly fat. So complete opposite of what most women are trying to attain. Whereas strength training, I like to do strength training slow and methodical. I don't do it fast. I do my 5x5s.
You don't do CrossFit?
No.
Now, is your friend that owns the CrossFit gym, is he going to be upset with you if he hears this interview?
He doesn't do CrossFit either.
Imagine that.
He strength trains. We train together. We put on some heavy metal and we lift heavy.
Nice.
And we take breaks when we need, But I'm all about hit it and then recover, hit it and recover. But like I said, I'm looking at my neurologic system and my hormones for it. But I don't know. I think that people are overdoing it, and all they're doing is creating this chronic metabolic nightmare of cortisol and adrenal fatigue and inflammation. And that's all coming from this constant state cardio that everybody's obsessed with. I don't know what happened in the 80s. Everybody started running. I don't know if you're old, and I'm old enough to remember when everything was cooked in lard and people listened to Jack LaLanne or watched him on television every day. And then somewhere in the 80s, we started spraying Pam on everything and using trans fats and, margarine, got off the healthy real fats and went to the horrible fats, which is why all the studies show horribleness with fat ingestion. And then everyone started running and doing aerobics.
I was reading about this was a couple of years ago. You've heard of General Kellogg's cornflakes and all that.
Yeah, he was interesting.
he was a Seventh Day Adventist or something like that, and he came up with that as a way to not eat. Came up with cornflakes as a way to not eat meat in the morning for religious reasons. And then all these famous people and politicians sort of latched onto that. And then we've been eating breakfast cereal ever since, whereas before we ate like sausage and eggs and fatty things. And I'll tell you, let's not we can go into any rabbit hole. I don't care. This is probably the longest interview on this whole interview series, but it's
I'm sorry.
I can't. No, you don't need to apologize. The reason it's went so long is because I don't know where to stop because there's too much good information. But I don't know if that's where it started. There's a lot of things that contributed to it, but it's just total insanity. People just started eating carbs right when they get up, eat carbs all day, do steady state cardio, and it's like all you're doing is just filling up glycogen, and then you're going to the gym and then like partially depleting it, and you're doing nothing that builds any momentum with your metabolism like, at all. So I don't know what happened. It's totally insane though. But I like the black box approach of there's inputs, and in that black box, sometimes you don't know what happens, and then there's outputs. Mm-hmm. If the outputs aren't what you want, that means the inputs are wrong. So even without the hormonal knowledge and the medical knowledge, I don't understand why people don't just go, you know what, this isn't working. I need to change something. Even that's simple. That should be something that people see, but they're not. So we just have to just drive it into their brains by doing stuff like this from a grassroots level.
Yeah, no, I know. I think if people hear it over and over and over, they eventually will catch it. But I have lots of patients who I'll suggest a modified paleo diet too. And I just use the word, I mean, I hate to call it paleo. It's just a whole foods anti-inflammatory diet. But they'll say, oh, you know, I did the Atkins diet in the 90s and I felt great. All my joint pain went away and I lost a bunch of weight. I'm like, yeah, so why'd you stop? Like, and I realize Atkins is a little hardcore and might not be terribly sustainable, but just that idea of that high protein, high fat, low carb, I'm like, why did you stop? And then they want to still argue with me to justify their carbohydrate intake. And I'm not there to argue. I'm just there to give them information and be objective. But they know it's worked for them in the past. I'm not really sure why they know someone in their family or maybe their mom and they look just like their mom and they have the same metabolism as their mom and they're like, oh yeah, my mom lost a bunch of weight on that. She feels great. I'm like, so what makes you think that you wouldn't, you know? And lastly, I want to hit on, I always tell patients, give it 90 days, especially with strength training, give it 90 days because the thing I see with strength training and dietary changes alone are great, but I won't see any change on labs for 90 days. So I will not retest anybody for 3 months. When it comes to strength training, what I noticed for myself and with several patients and just people I know, you start to build muscle mass under that fat and it looks like you're getting bigger and it looks like you're getting bigger and people start to freak out. They don't think it's working. And I just tell them, trust the process, give it 90 days because somewhere around that 90-day mark, and you probably can talk on this more, the fat just starts to burn off. And all of a sudden the waist shows up and all of a sudden the fat just starts melting off. And so I think with anything, giving it a fair 90-day chance is absolutely necessary. And I just say, trust the process, stay the course. Trust the process, stay the course.
And that's, so when people start doing strength training, they increase the muscle cells' ability to hold glycogen. So if someone starts doing strength training and they're also still doing a high carbohydrate diet, not only are they going to be pushing out a lot of insulin, which makes muscle and fat grow, but they're going to, because their body can now hold more glycogen, if they're going to feed those carbs in, so now their muscle cells are going to be nice and full with glycogen, and then that little layer of fat hasn't left yet. So now everything looks bigger. So
they look fluffy.
Yeah. So usually the people that I've seen that specific scenario happen with is people that they're doing too many carbs at the beginning of the strength training. Now, you could argue and say that those carbs are fueling them to build a better metabolism for later if they'll stick with it. And that's what gets really interesting is you have to almost look at the person and maybe ask some questions and get a feel for, can they stick with this? And then if they can't stick with it, sometimes you got to modify so they can see what they need to see just to get them. You almost have to trick the client. That sounds really manipulative, doesn't it?
No, but it's very much a motivational mental thing. And you mentioned insulin, and that is absolutely where I think insulin's beneficial but I don't see any other place where insulin is terribly beneficial because it is anabolic, but it's meant to be there because primally we're meant to lift heavy stuff, so it's meant to be an anabolic steroid and help us build muscle mass, like you said, and actually connective tissue. But for some reason, our metabolisms have gotten so messed up. Well, I think the reason we see so much obesity and diabetes and insulin resistance is because we are meant to be, we're meant to hold on. I think of everything in primal medicine terms. We're meant to hold on to food when it's abundant, but food didn't used to be that abundant. You kind of had to get what you could take, and you had to be able to pack on some fat layer pretty quickly to fat storage so you could use it as fuel while food was scarce. But now it's just like, America's like a giant feeding trough. It's just food, and it's all quick carbs and it's all junk. And chemicals. I mean, that's a whole nother discussion, is toxicity. But
oh my gosh. Yeah, we talked about that a little bit with Wendy Meyer's interview. It sounds like you've listened to some of the interviews, but
toxicity, that's a big one. But anyway, insulin is beneficial, and carbohydrates are beneficial, but I tell people I only think they're beneficial if you're strength training. If you're not strength training, I don't think those are beneficial things for you. So if you want to eat carbs, you got to build some muscle, period. You got to earn them.
Well, I don't even know how to come up with a protocol for life if you can't do strength training. And granted, there's some people that can't because of health issues, but it's just really tough to be optimized hormonally. It's tough to have a good body composition. It's tough to have healthy joints without strength training. But one thing I've seen with diet is that, to me, the diet has to be sustainable. And so all the people, here's another thing you hear. I know what to do, I just don't do it. Because back in, the 90s, I did the Atkins diet and it worked great. And what's interesting is that if it really was a diet that was great, they would have stuck with it. And the biggest way that I've seen for people to have sustained success is through, or one of the components, is to have strategic refeeds. Because so many people are trying to figure out, do I go in a calorie deficit? And then over time, eventually that's going to chip away at the resting metabolic rate. Yeah. It's going to downregulate thyroid hormone. But then if they're in a calorie surplus, they're going to slowly gain body fat. So it's like, what's the answer? So the simplest way I've seen is to be, and it depends on the goal. Let's say for someone who just wants to maintain sort of low body fat, is to be in a slight calorie deficit, and then once every 4 to 7 days to do a really big, what I like to call a refeed meal. Some people call it a cheat meal, and it sort of has a way where it depends on the person. But if you get good at listening to your body, that's sort of your body's way of resetting, because you can't get it perfect. You can't get the calorie number perfect. You can't get the macro profile perfect. And then as you're strength training and lifting, your body's changing, you're aging. So even if you had the perfect formula, that would change over time anyway. And I really feel like these strategic refeeds help people so much because they get to eat some of the stuff they want, and it also helps sort of balance some of the stuff throughout the week. But as far as we were talking about carbs, people always say, well, why shouldn't I have carbs at this time? The whole point of carbs is it's really, you could break it into lots of different reasons, but it's to replenish glycogen, the storage form of carbohydrates. And if you can become aware of where you think your glycogen levels are, then you know whether you need them or not.
Yep, that's very true.
And if people if they're trying to figure out if they need carbs, what they need to know is once liver and muscle glycogen is full, all the carbs that they take in are either going to burn once it gets in the bloodstream, either burnt or stored as extra fat. So if your glycogen's empty, by all means hit the carbs. That's why I try to walk people into that refeed with fairly depleted glycogen, and then bam, hit it. Because you can't really do too much damage in a 2, 3, 4 hour period, or even in a 24-hour period if you're depleted. Yeah. But people really need to become aware of their glycogen. You said there are certain times of the month where you'll have a lot more carbs, but it sounds like you're really good at listening to your body.
Yeah, I am, and it's funny. I've seen studies where they showed that you're actually more insulin resistant the 1 to 2 weeks prior to menstruating. So that's probably not the best time to be eating carbs, but it seems like that's also when women's serotonin and dopamine is the most low because they're premenstrual. And so carbs tend to take care of that, But I think what you're saying and what I'm saying really comes into play most notably when you have a lot of well-trained skeletal muscle. New skeletal muscle or lack of skeletal muscle, I think it's almost a different set of rules. But when you have well-trained skeletal muscle, I can play around. I mean, if I'm having a stressful week, I can mess with carbs. I can hit them hard if I want to, and I'll have very little repercussions. I might get a little fluffy on my belly and lose my abs, but I know it comes off. To be 42 almost and to be able to just get my abs back on cue is amazing. Like that's not something most 40-year-olds are dealing with, that middle-age midsection, and I think you and I are talking about a place where our instincts are on. I think when you're strong and you have well-trained skeletal muscle and your mind's clear, especially if you're eating fairly low inflammatory foods, I think your instincts turn on because your hormones are working. And when your instincts are on, you know what you should and should be or should not be eating. And, I watch my dogs. They function as a pack, but they're amazing to watch how they eat, how they move, what herbs in the garden they go chew on, because their instincts are on. And I think we just lost our instincts as humans. We're just walking around shoveling a bunch, we're just trying to get the dopamine. Everybody's a bunch of dopamine addicts trying to eat that junk food. And a lot of the junk foods have dopamine hijacking chemicals in them that they don't even tell you about. So just getting people off of processed foods, getting them onto a clean anti-inflammatory diet is the first step. And then if I can get their brain turned on, I do that with a high fat, high protein diet, low carb. Then from there, we're training, hopefully they're training the whole time or they're building some skeletal muscle, and then balancing the hormones, eventually, that's why I say 3 months, because that's just the tip of the iceberg. Take them 2 years later, and like you and you've been training a lot longer than I have, but I know what I do and don't need pretty quickly. I remember being at a conference with my girlfriend she's really muscular, and she looked at me and she's like, I need some carbs now. And I was like, oh my God, me too. And we just knew we needed some carbs.
I need some carbs now.
Because we had been eating so, we've been living off our protein powder in the hotel room at the conference, and just, we hadn't been carbing it up at all. So anyway, you start to get to know that about yourself. And that's a whole different world than, say, my mom, whose insulin is sky high, who doesn't get any of it. She just doesn't get this. No matter how hard I try to teach her, she's a wonderful woman, but she just doesn't get it, or she won't implement it. And so for her, she can't even look at a piece of pie without her insulin surging. And by the way, that's a true fact. If you even look at sugar and your blood sugar's screwed up, you will actually go through the very similar hormonal insulin response just by looking at sugar, just by thinking about it. Isn't that crazy? You don't even have to put it in your mouth.
Yeah, that is crazy. I mean, there's a reason that drug addicts can't just keep drugs on the counter at their house. I mean,
yeah.
But yeah. As far as, like for stress management, I love carbohydrates as a tool for stress management, like you said. So I actually like to use them as a way to control stress, and I like to have my glycogen somewhat depleted most of the time, and so when I'm in that state, I know that at any point in time, if I feel stress rising, or I just feel like, I'm not able to fall asleep right now, so I'm going to eat a bunch of carbs and push out some serotonin. But the thing is, if you're already full of glycogen at that time, you kind of instinctually know that you shouldn't be eating so many carbs because it's just going to go to fat storage. And then that alone, without even knowing what's going on in your body, I think causes people stress. Like, I feel like I shouldn't have eaten those carbs, and now I'm stressed, and it was supposed to. So if you just walk around and you're just a little bit glycogen depleted, and then you play that trump card when you need it for stress manager for sleep, now you can play it and know that it's actually serving you. So once you get good at understanding glycogen levels and the hormonal effects that carbohydrates have on your body, it really empowers you to use it as a tool to be able to sleep better or to be able to knock out stress in the middle of the day. Whereas if you're eating them all the time, glycogen's full all the time, now any extra carbs you pile on are just turning into fat. And now you're in a worse hormonal deficit, and it just turns into this big cascading effect. So carbohydrates are a very powerful tool if you use them right, but you gotta understand what's going on. Listen to your body.
Totally agree, which is a lot of education, and that's hard. It's hard to gather, but I think I always tell patients, this is just a journey. This is not a destination. You're just on the path, and the path starts with you lifting 2-3 days a week and you eating we're going to start low carb, but we're going to add them back in when we see that you tolerate them okay. But we got to get your labs balanced out, or we got to get your body when someone's body composition is starting to dial in, that their insulin resistance is decreasing. So no, you're absolutely right. But I think you've got to get to a point where you know your body and you're strong enough that you can do that. but that takes a while.
It does.
It's not a 30-day quick. I'm so tired of these like fitness experts online, like 30-day quick fix. I'm like, there is no 30-day quick fix. What are you talking about?
I don't work for people. I do. Like I've got some fighters that I'll cut them for like maybe a fight or something like that, special cases. But most of the time, if somebody wants to work with me, it's got to be a year now. And they get such better results, and now the stress level isn't high for them to get results right away. But yeah, so anyway, at a certain point, we should probably end the interview.
Yes.
And that way we can maybe go lift some weights or something. Once again, all roads lead to strength training. Do you have a free gift for our listeners?
I do. I have a free ebook, 5 Reasons Why You're Not Losing Weight, and a couple hormonal secrets that are in there too. So that can be found on the link. I'm going to have you link it up to this interview.
Yep, we'll put the link in the show notes.
Yep, it's a great, and I'm also doing we'll send you out an email too. I'm also doing a free webinar at the end of this month on, natural ways to manage your pain, which is some of what we've talked about and some other things. So that'll be exciting. It's just a free webinar at the end of the month. I haven't set the exact time, but we're going to get an email out to everybody on that too. So that should be helpful for anyone who's dealing with joint pain.
So I'll probably check that out myself. So
yeah,
that sounds awesome.
Please do.
And I want to know about these secrets in your free gift. Most doctors keep it a secret, but not Dr. Tyna. She's going to tell us about it, right?
Well, it's just stuff that I take for granted as common sense, but a lot of people don't know. And I don't realize people don't know until I start talking to the, average Joe. And I'm single, so I'll go out on a date with someone and I say something and they'll look at me like I'm crazy. And I'm like, oh, most people don't know this. I probably shouldn't just blurt that right out. So hopefully there'll be some insights in there.
Well, now I really want to read it. I'm sold.
All right.
And so we'll put the link in the show notes. Do they need to enter their name and email, and then this will be sent to them, or how's this work?
Yep. Name and email, and they should get an email right back, if not within 24 hours. And it'll have a PDF in there for them.
Very cool. Go check that out. I really appreciate all the listeners tuning in, especially this will be the longest interview in the series. So thanks for dealing with me, Dr. Tyna, and thank you, listeners, for tuning in. Really happy we had you on here.
It was super fun. Thank you for having me.
Thanks again for tuning in to the Woman Meets Weights interview series. I'm your host, David Shawn. If you have any questions regarding topics in this interview, I do want to hear from you. My email is david@davidshawn.co.